So depending on the corner of the internet that you're on, you are by no means unfamiliar with the recent resurgence and honestly newfound obsession for some people with Carolyn Bessette Kennedy. A resurgence of images from her life in the 90s, along with a recent anthology series titled Love Story, has catapulted her style as the latest blueprint for really perfecting 90s minimalism and I think just heading on your way to becoming a 2026 reincarnate of the perfect 90s it girl. At least that's how it seems from my perspective. While I do admire a lot of aspects of her style, I do want to dive a bit deeper in this video into why I believe that she's captivated so many at this particular point in time, why I don't believe her style is as unique as the internet is leading us to believe, and I think what this says about the lack of personal identity within trend cycles today. So it's a lot of good things we're going to get into for this video. What's up, y'all? My name's Akia, and I am the artist, researcher, and curator behind Buttermilk Goods. In the physical, I don't know what happened to my voice there. My goodness. Let me do that again. Buttermilk Goods. In the physical world, this is a curated vintage shop that I own in Metro Detroit, and in this digital landscape, I talk about all things at the intersection of fashion, history, culture, money, and the realities of owning and operating a store. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, I think you're in the right place, and if you are joining me again, it's so good to see you, and if you're stopping by for the first time, it's also good to see you. Some easy, free ways to support the channel and the work that I'm doing here is to like the video, to leave a comment, or to share, and most importantly, to subscribe. So without further ado, I think we're gonna get straight into this video. I'm really excited to talk about this today, so let's get into it. So who is Carolyn Bessette Kennedy? Before we get too deep into this video, I just want to quickly explain and introduce who she is, just in case you are someone who isn't familiar with her. So Carolyn Bessette Kennedy is most known as the late wife of John F. Kennedy Jr., whom she began dating in 1994. But they met during her time at Calvin Klein, where she worked as a publicist for their VIP clientele, which is how she ended up meeting JFK Jr. And that relationship ultimately pushed her into the spotlight as a person of interest. She has become adored for her effortless style, her understated silhouettes, and I think her ability to exude a level of cool that, for a lack of better terms, she was just born with it. She just had it. Whatever it is, she just had it. But unfortunately, her life came to an end as a result of a 1999 plane crash that was actually piloted by her husband, JFK Jr. Their plane ended up crashing into the Atlantic Ocean while they were on their way to Martha's Vineyard, and unfortunately, both of their lives were lost. But her energy ultimately still lives on through the deep impact that she has had as a style icon. And I do want to acknowledge that while I think certain branches of the internet are just now coming into familiarity with her, she has been a style icon for a lot of people for many years prior to this. But I also have seen numerous reports stating that she was, in fact, very private. She didn't enjoy media attention despite her job and her role as a publicist, and that she really didn't enjoy being in the public eye. And so I find that really fascinating, and a lot of these reports are coming from family, friends, coworkers, people who knew her personally. So that's something I have definitely been thinking about a lot. But it also does appear that she enjoyed some aspects of this. I mean, she was still working within fashion and was working at Calvin Klein, which was absolutely like at the top of their game at this point. And I think there is some truth in being able to appreciate the lifestyle while not enjoying some of the somewhat oppressive realities of navigating fame or being in the public eye. I find that really interesting, and it makes me think a lot about the way that the Birkin sort of took on its own life and really contrasted the personality and the values and the interests of Jane Birkin. So it does make me very curious as to how she would feel about the recent media craze with her. I mean, just honestly, every aspect of her life, not just including her style, but you can really see how this is also impeding to her relationship with JFK and how that is sort of profiled in this series love story. I don't know. I think to me, it seems that she oscillated somewhere in between enjoying the lifestyle and not enjoying the things that come with fame, and she would not be the first person to feel that way. And I think that that's important to note primarily because I think that part of the allure with everyone's referring to her as CBK, but I think what was really fascinating about Carolyn, I don't want to say CBK because she has an actual name, so Carolyn, I think what's really fascinating to a lot of people about Carolyn is that I think it's sort of that like element of that mystique, that mystery, and feeling like she had no interest in the interest in her. And I think sometimes that can make people feel like there is some level of it's like she didn't need the attention, but she's still getting it. And I think a lot of people are really fascinated with that element of maybe being a cool girl but not having to try. And we're going to talk on that a little bit later, but that's something I have been thinking about and ruminating on really heavily. Okay, so I want to also start by giving a quick overview of what her style actually was. I will say I'm going to focus on certain elements specifically for this video, but I do want to note that I think a lot of aspects of her style are being dulled a little bit with some of the images that people are pulling out and really heightening. It's like an encapsulation of her style. I do think that there were just as many images that showed a lot of personality in her style as well. Not to say that she doesn't have personality in some of these other images, but we'll break it down. Anyway, so let's go into a quick overview of her style and sort of look at a lot of the elements that people are trying to recreate. And of course, leading the charge, we are going to be looking at Vogue first. So back in October 2024, Vogue actually published an online profile of her style where they highlighted 10 ways to emulate the style of Carolyn Bessette Kennedy. So, according to Vogue, some of the largest elements of her style include dressing up a white button down, the infamous little black dress, the tortoiseshell headbands, her ovular sunnies, her undone or natural looking hair. She had very nice statement outerwear, black formal wear, and intentional minimalism, as quoted by Elle. So personally, it seems to me that a lot of elements of her style that people tend to gravitate towards, I think really encapsulate understated silhouettes, versatile pieces, neutrals, and a natural presentation in terms of her hair and her makeup. And in all honesty, I think a lot of what people are attracted to about this style is that it's somewhat timeless and it doesn't necessarily require extensive funds to recreate. And I think it is very accessible for a wide variety of people, especially a wide variety of budgets. Like you can definitely recreate a lot of the core elements of a lot of her outfits without needing to break the bank. And I think that overall, at least from the images that I've seen circulating widely, I genuinely find that her style, or at least the images that people are focusing on, that her style was relatively simple, and I think that it makes it feel a lot more accessible. Ultimately, I believe that a lot of what worked with Bessette Kennedy's style is that it really valued simplicity, and I think people enjoy feeling like they don't have to do as much to be considered stylish, especially after a period of excessive displays of wealth, an emphasis on luxury, and I think people are just overall exhausted with constantly feeling like we have to show up one another and existing with endless comparisons, because you're able to see what so many people are doing and so many people are wearing and where they're going. And I think that there is a little bit of fatigue in that. I don't know where these geese are coming from. This is wild. I don't even know if you can hear them. I'm just rambling about these geese outside and you can't even hear. But I will say that I do love a lot of elements of her style, and I personally consider them to be a part of my personal style as well. Back in high school and college, I was completely enamored with 90s style, and I would say I pretty much exclusively wore pieces that I had thrifted from the 90s. And this was also in the 2010s, however, so in my opinion, it was really like that last period where you could find good clothes from the 90s and the early 2000s in the thrift stores. Right now, I think it's just being flooded with so much from these fast fashion sites that it's honestly getting much harder to source clothing from the 90s, in my opinion. At least clothing that fits within, I would say, the CBK formula. But I really did enjoy the style in the 90s, and it was also what I could afford at the time, because when I was 15, I couldn't afford anything at the mall. And so I could go into the thrift store, and a lot of what fit as well was a lot of the high-waisted denim and the high-waisted maxi skirts and the dresses, and it was honestly just what I wore for the majority of my 20s and my late teens, in all honesty. But um, with that in mind, I will say that I don't personally find myself as enamored with Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, primarily because I've always personally and I think professionally also focused my vintage selling on 90s revival. Now, I will say that this has shifted slightly since I have become a mother, and that's primarily because my relationship with my body has changed. And I do find a lot of the elements that sort of have people fascinated with this 90s revival in general, not just with Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, but I think it's also synonymous with the shift in body standards. And right now, we are existing during a time where GLP-1s are extremely popular and are becoming much more accessible for everyday people and everyday budgets. And a lot of people are really shifting back towards those stick-thin standards. And so that embrace of curves and bellies and cellulite is no longer. And we're really back in a cycle of sort of being thin and fit and somewhat androgynous, though there is still an emphasis on like the Pilates bodies and whatnot. But I think ironically, it actually mirrors so many of the aspects of heroin chic body standards that were really at their height in the 90s. And I think it's impossible to talk about a style like Carolyn Bessette Kennedy's or to talk about 90s minimalism without talking about the insane body standards and the presence of heroin chic as the unspoken but sort of spoken rule around acceptable body types and what actually works for a lot of the silhouettes that are present within 90s minimalism. I think that one of the biggest signs of wealth is time, And I think that the ability to have time to work on yourself and maintain your body, I think it perfectly coincides with many aspects of shifting body standards that mirror that emphasis on being thin, that in all honesty was an inherent requirement for successfully achieving the style of 90s minimalism. And I think that this is very present also with a lot of the campaigns. And actually, thinking about the fact that Carolyn Bessette Kennedy was working at Calvin Klein, and I just, like, let's just take a moment to look back at some of the ads that were coming out at this time that Calvin Klein was promoting. Um, I don't always think that this side of 90s minimalism is discussed as frequently, but I've been thinking about it a lot as I've navigated my own journey through postpartum and no longer being stick thin like I was for the majority of my 20s. And back then, it was so much easier for me to achieve and maintain this style. So, as I navigate a different body postpartum, my relationship to 90s revival and 90s minimalism has definitely changed, and it's made me reassess a lot of the aspects that I just didn't really have to think about 10 years ago. And I think honestly that the thought of squeezing myself into some structured high waist denim pants, I can't fathom it. Like the thinking about the reality of squeezing that plastic tortoise shell headband on my head and the reality of the headache that I would be walking around with all day, I just don't think I could do it. I just don't think I could do it. And even thinking about the ways that satins or silks honestly seem to illuminate every bulge and curve and unwanted bit of fat. I mean, it's just something I feel very differently about in my 30s and the way that my body is changing than I did when I was in my 20s. And again, I think we can look back at a lot of the campaigns that Calvin Klein was putting out during that time. Think about the ages and the body types and the lifestyles of a lot of those models. So, while I do appreciate many aspects of 90s minimalism, I can also understand that it doesn't work for a lot of people. And I think especially those with bodies that don't disappear easily into those simple silhouettes and the cuts that are inherent to that style. Now, there are also things that I do appreciate, and that is largely also because of my body type. I have naturally very long legs and a shorter torso, so honestly, high waist silhouettes work really amazing for me, primarily because they are one of the few cuts that actually work well for my proportions. I personally genuinely do prefer neutrals. I do prefer blazers. I do love button downs. I honestly love denim. I don't wear a skirt that isn't maxi length or knee length. While I find this resurgence to be incredibly exciting as someone who has had a love of 90s minimalism for my entire life, I think also as the daughter of a woman who experienced her mid-20s in the 90s, and I was a child in the 90s, so I also saw my mom and a lot of her friends wearing um, this style. I mean, they were in their 20s in the 90s and they were tiny and it worked for them. And um, yeah, I feel like you always want to emulate what you saw when you were younger. And I think we see that, a lot with the Gen Z right now and their fascination with Y2K. For me, that was all of 90s minimalism. And so, as soon as I got into my teens and my 20s, I was wearing it all the time. So, with that being said, I do wonder if it is considered style to be a carbon copy of someone whose own style has not evolved over the past 3 decades due to the end of her life. I wonder, is it considered personal style if you tirelessly seek to emulate every aspect of an outfit from an image and end up looking exactly like half of the women that you encounter out in the world? And while I don't think that this is specific to this decade or even to this recent fascination with Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, I do definitely think it illuminates a real problem within the ways that we have consumed fashion online, especially within the past few years. I think that we've created a vacuum of ideas where the original intent of appreciation is sort of blowing up into mass hysteria that is honestly trickling down into all elements of consumerism. At this point in time, if you want to look like Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, you go to Vogue, you go to Elle, or even your favorite TikTok creator, and you can click the links to buy dupes or recreations or aspects of her outfit, and suddenly you have style. I don't know if that's really how it should work. But I think that a lot of what's also fascinating to me is that none of this considers the context of these images. Does walking around all day in a kitten heel sandal actually exist as a practical choice in your day to day life? Do you even have the body type for some of the pairings or the silhouettes that would not only accentuate your specific body type as an individual, but also make you feel good and confident in your own body? Does the material of some of these pieces actually work for the climate that you live in and the weather that you have to navigate? And do any of these outfits actually translate well from paparazzi photos on analog film to actually moving around in these items in your actual life? Do people even ask themselves these questions before they rush to purchase these items? Or does this assignment simply become about how well you can execute the path that's already been laid out to you? So, this also brings me to my final point, and this is a question that I have been ruminating on a lot, especially while making this video and doing a lot of the research for this video. I really came to this final question of how original is Carolyn Bessette Kennedy's style really? There are so many aspects of the conversation that I personally feel are being left out. And I think most notably, I think about her role at Calvin Klein and how that heavily contributed to her style. I think that many aspects of her style encapsulate much of what Calvin Klein was known for in the 90's, and Carolyn Bessette Kennedy was also not the only woman who achieved this at this point in time. So, if you take a moment to look at a lot of images of celebrities and other paparazzi photos from this time, I think that you would find that there are many other stars who could be considered to be style icons of their own if we are going by many of the metrics that people are using to consider Carolyn Bessette Kennedy's style as iconic. A lot of these images incorporate the same styles, the same silhouettes, and the same pairings, primarily because that's simply what was available at the time. It was the genuine style of that decade. It's what was in stores, it's what was on the runway, and it's what was accessible. Just as we had particular moments of style in the 1980's, early 2000's, and even the godforsaken period of the 2010's, you'll find commonalities for most individuals during any given time period because it's simply what was available. It does bring into question the true role of personal style, and it makes me wonder if choice and autonomy truly exist within the sphere of fashion. Does being a part of the larger canon of style actually breed individuality, or does it suppress it? Personally, most of the individuals that I've encountered who I would consider to have their own personal style are those that don't actually participate that much in trends and are largely uninterested in what is or was popular. Now, I don't mean for this to sound like these are the only individuals who I would consider to be stylish, but I don't think that having personal style matters when it comes to what other people think of your style. I don't mean to suggest that these individuals are the beacons of fashion and are the only pioneers that exist. I think pioneers exist in all areas. But I do think it says something about the level of isolation and removal that must exist for true individuality to have the space to emerge. And that's something that takes time. It doesn't form overnight or by simply following a formula put together by a social media influencer or a fashion magazine. both of whom are likely financially profiting by directing you to consume or curate specific trends. There was even an auction done by Sotheby's called the Fashion Icons Auction, and it included 3 coats owned by Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, as quoted by Vogue. It made me think a lot about the role of consumerism within the development of personal style and who's benefiting from pushing certain trends. In a book titled Reinvention and Restlessness by Colleen Hill, also including contributions by 3 others, including Valerie Steele, who I've mentioned in previous videos, she states that fashion's restlessness was seen not only in the sheer number of competing trends, but also in its inspiration. While historicized styles were by no means a new concept, the fashion revivals of the 1990s occurred at an unusually fast pace, and they often overlapped. In a Vogue editorial, Catherine Betts observed that the spring 1995 season was one in which designers pillaged the past relentlessly and quite literally for inspiration. Although it is clear that some designers seemed intent on disassociating themselves from the present, others were engaging with more immediate matters within the fashion industry. The expansion of the internet changed the ways in which fashion imagery and clothing were promoted, disseminated, and consumed. Yet the use of technology was not solely related to capitalistic endeavors. It also inspired creative fashions that portrayed an anxious energy about the future. Heightened focus on technology during the 1990s fueled the overlap between fashion and activism, particularly environmentalism as well. While the sustainably focused technique of upcycling has become an essential part of today's fashion lexicon, its use in high fashion was pioneered during the 1990s by designers such as Lamine Goyate and Martin Margiela. I recently saw someone post on Threads stating that Kelly Klein, Calvin Klein's wife, was the true source of inspiration for Carolyn Bessette Kennedy. And it reminded me that no matter how seemingly unique and pioneering someone's style might be, there's always going to be someone who's considered to have done it better, to have done it first, or to be more deserving of the credit. And in the end, I think that's all the more reason to wear what you want and to actually give yourself the space, the time, and the silence to figure out what that is. That's all for today's essay. Thank you so much for watching the video, or if you tuned into the podcast, thank you so much for listening. I will catch you in the next episode. Bye.